Hey there, I'm Gabby and I'm a wet and wet oil painter and we're working on barns. This is part 4. So let's look at our canvas and see how far we are. We've done this one with mostly a knife, this one with a brush, and they were both drawn out in the first place. Now this time we are going to do a little bit of work making some barns without drawing them out first. So I'm going to bring you guys in closer and then we'll get working. Excellent. So we're going to get moving on this right away. We're going to sort of use some of the same similar colors, but we're not going to be doing any sort of underwashing while we're doing this. I'm going to grab my dark scarlet color that I used, and I'm going to keep the light, I think, coming from the same direction. And I think we're going to do the same sort of barns underneath the old ones, but without using a pencil to draw it out or any outlines. So I'm going to start with this side over here. Actually, let me get this dark stuff off my brush, or off my palette knife. I'm going to start with this lighter color. And it'll make sense in a second why I start on this side and then go to the other. So I'm just going to sort of form out the roof. Okay, I'm going to bring you guys in a little bit closer if I can here. That's probably about as close as I'm going to be able to get. So now that I have that outlined, I'm just going to drag that paint down. And barns don't have to take a long time. When I do the drawing out and the underwashing and all that sort of stuff, it definitely takes longer. One thing I do recommend though is if you're going to do this with a palette knife, definitely get the paint that's going where your barn is. Scrape as much of that off before you start painting. This is completely dry. That's what we started with. But obviously if you're doing a wet and wet picture, it's not going to start out completely dry. And also know that when you're using a knife, your barn or whatever building you're using is going to grow as you work on it. Okay? There we go. A bit like frosting a cake, I always think. And I want my beams to sort of go this direction on my barn, so I'm going to pull it that way. Okay? So now, we're going to do the back side. So I'm going to grab that darker scarlet color. And I'm just going to drag downwards. And then I'm going to go from the bottom and come back up. And I'll put an edge from one side, flip my wrist over, and an edge from the other side. Okay, very simple, and it looks nice and shadowed and all that fun stuff. We're going to put on the roof. I have a little bit lighter color that I'm going to start with. And let's see, this is about the length of 1.5 knives, so we're going to go 1.5. And then we'll drag them down with the angle of that roof. Once you've dragged it downwards, come from the bottom and drag back up. And keep in mind, if you do this with a knife, you can always come back in and clean it up with a brush, and I do a lot of that. Okay? There's one part of our roof. We're going to get a little bit darker. Hopefully this translates, because I don't have a whole lot of dark paint on the palette right now. And we're going to go with the other angle of the roof. And getting the angles of a barn roof proper are a little bit tricky, but it can be done. I do find that I end up sort of adjusting and readjusting my roofs a lot, no matter what buildings I do. Okay. And then taking a look at this, I think I'm going to grab some more of that lighter color and just sort of clean that up a little bit. And then I'll bring that angle. And there's that. And then we don't want to forget about this side. Okay. We'll put that on there. Just little plops. I want to clean off my palette quick. I use small palettes, but I have like numerous of them. That way I can sort of go back and forth in between. And sometimes I'll scrape up the paint that I'm working with and I'll just put it on another palette. Just sort of some ideas. I'm going to grab a little roll of white. Put in our doors. 2. There we go. It looks a little wonky, but that's okay. I'm not going for perfection. I'm going to follow along those doors on the bottom. And then you can come back in if you need to, like I do. Clean that stuff up if you need to. Okay? Now, again, I know this isn't perfect. I'm not going for perfect, but that's painting it with a knife. And I'll back out again. Sorry, a lot of backing in and out this video. And you can just sort of see that this one is a lot cleaner than this one is down here. And that's totally fine. You can always come back with a knife, or sorry, not with a knife, with a brush, and just sort of straighten things out if you need to. Not a problem. You end up grabbing some of that other paint, just kind of incorporate it in. The one thing that using a brush will do, though, especially if you use it on the area with your knife, is it will sort of take away that ruggedness that your knife will give. Okay, so we're going to come back in, and we're going to paint barn number 4. So in order to paint barn number 4, I'm going to need a bit more paint. Here's my 2 browns, burnt umber. You could do this with Van Dyke brown as well. The difference really between burnt umber and Van Dyke brown, I'm sure they're made differently, but when it comes to look, is Van Dyke brown is more transparent than burnt umber. Just something to sort of keep in mind. All right, so we're going to take that burnt umber. We're going to get a nice little roll on the end of our knives, like so. And we're going to do our barn. Now, something to remember too, if you're doing a wet and wet painting, even though you've probably scraped off the paint underneath where you're going to put your building, it's still going to be a little bit wetter than what I'm working with here. This is a little bit dry. So if your canvas is a little bit wet, your paint should move a little bit better. Little bits, plop on a roof, and then we'll bring it down. One thing I struggled with when I first started painting was sort of getting the paint to go off of the knife the way I wanted it to. So if you're having a hard time with that, again, go back to that mountains video that I did a long time ago. And just check it out. There's some ways to get some practice, and just like with mountains, whatever, you just have to get used to using a knife. Once you sort of get your hand around it, it becomes a lot easier. Sorry for that bit of unpleasantness. Okay, so there's the front part of our barn. Again, it's going to be in shadow as the light's coming from this direction. I originally planned on sort of bringing in the light from different directions, but then I kind of changed my mind. Okay, this little bit here, that's that wall. And then we'll put in this wall. Now, the shorter and more angled these side walls are, the more face-on you're looking at your barn. It's just something to sort of keep in mind. Again, if perspective and the concept of perspective drawing is completely foreign to you, look up perspective drawing, and I don't know how much practice it'll take, but it does help. I did it in art class when I was in high school, and it was definitely a lifesaver when it came into oil painting. Not something I expected to bring along with, but just like me learning how to ride a motorcycle because I knew how to drive a manual transmission, it made it easier. Okay, we're gonna grab some of that lighter stuff that we had laying around from the roof from before, and I'm gonna put on the roof. When you're doing roofs with a knife, you just want to make sure that you're moving with the direction of how the roof is going to sit. It will make it look a lot more realistic versus if you try to go straight up and down with it, because you're going to see little bits of that in your paint regardless. Okay. Now, one problem I'm getting, and this happens sometimes, is that besides the fact that I'm running out of paint here, let me grab some more paint. One of the problems that I'm sort of coming up with is the fact that the top of the building almost looks like it's shorter than the bottom. These are not the same colors, but not a big deal. And this is what I always say about buildings getting longer as you paint, especially with a knife. Alright, I'm going to grab some more of that burnt sienna, and I'm going to fill this in. And I find myself doing this a lot, even like when it comes to like doing like little cabins and stuff, where I end up having to lengthen the walls and sort of move the walls around as I do this. Okay, I'm going to grab a little bit more. So that shape is very simple to do. We'll make sure that we do a little bit of roofage over here. Add a little bit more of an angle to that roof. And then I'll just grab some of that paint and sort of skip over the top. One reason I'm not the biggest fan of using a knife when it comes to painting buildings, other than it's hard to get them to look perfect, is that they leave them very gobby, and if you have a painting that you want to have it dry a little faster, any knife work will make it dry slower. When you do paint, obviously the background is already wet, it's already painted. That makes life easier. You'll be able to blend out stuff like this easier. But, you know, if you make little accidents like this, a little bit of paint thinner can help sort of mitigate out that problem. That just helps us see the edges better. And then again, just like the other one, you can come back through with a brush if you want, and you can sort of clean up some of those edges. You can also thin back out the paint if the paint is getting really thick on your building with a knife by using a brush. And the more I do to this, the more I screw up the roof, but that's okay. There we go. Not perfect, not going for perfection. We didn't put in the doors yet. I'm just gonna grab a brush, and you can do this with a palette knife too, where you scrape out the door space. I just happen to have a brush in my hand, so that's what I'm using. But you can slide in a little bit of a door. If you want to do white outlines on the door, that's pretty easy to do too. Just 1, 2 little bits on the top. These shorter doors are always more difficult to do anyway, because you end up having to clean up around them. And fairly simply, there is a barn. Now again, I know it's very ugly, but I don't care, that's not the point. The point is sort of to show you guys how to paint these barns. If you guys have any questions or comments, put them in the comment section of the video and I will happily answer them. Thank you very much for watching. If you guys could like, share, subscribe, that would be very helpful. Again, I am Gabby, and I really do hope that you guys fall in love with oil painting just as much as I have. Bye guys.